I'm at the age I need these. Different ones. When Howard and I worked together, one rule was to never bore your audience by telling them what they already know. So I'm not going to tell you what a funny guy Howard was, or how his singular comic vision revolutionized the world of advertising and pop culture, or how many great movies he directed. Others have, and we'll talk about all of that today and for years to come. What I'd like to tell you is what Howard meant to me and why I loved him. Towards the beginning of Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield, a 16-year-old writing from a mental institution, says, "What really knocks me out is a book that when you are all done reading it, you wish the author that wrote it was a terrific friend of yours and you could call him up on the phone whenever you felt like it. That doesn't happen much, though." I was not technically in a mental institution. I was at the Oakwood School in North Hollywood, and Howard Zieff was a director, not an author. But I was about Holden's age when I saw Howard's first film, Slither, and reviewed it for the Oakwood Gorilla. I was crazy for it, and in my adolescent wisdom, I opined that Howard Zieff was a promising new talent we could expect to hear a lot from in the future, and then I returned to my full-time job, wondering what a female breast might actually feel like. I soon found myself writing for television while juggling semesters at college, eventually becoming the story editor for Buck Henry's series Quark. It was during that job that I wrote my first screenplay, a Woody Allen ripoff, oops, I meant homage, called All Conquers Love, and Sherry Lansing, then a new Columbia executive, gave me a list of 3 directors she'd make my film with. The short list included the name Howard Zieff. By then, Howard had gone on to direct what many people, myself included, and John Levin included, consider one of the classic movies of the 70s, Hearts of the West. He was then in post-production on his 3rd film, House Calls. In short, it was clear that my high school film reviews were taken very seriously in Hollywood, and all the potential I had identified in this director back in 10th grade was now being realized. So when I saw Sherry's list, the only name on it that mattered to me was Howard Zieff. Howard read my script and wanted to direct it, and so a meeting was set up. We were an odd pairing. I was just 22 years old, but possessed the immaturity and short attention span of a boy many years younger. While Howard was an iconic figure of Madison Avenue, now a film director in the full bloom of his creative powers, about to celebrate his 50th birthday, or as I would call him today, a punk kid. Despite the decades and life experience that separated us, what was immediately apparent and quite astonishing upon meeting Howard was not that we didn't feel the gap between us, but that there wasn't any gap to be felt. With Howard, I was actually able to live out Holden Caulfield's fantasy of calling up a great author that I wished was a terrific friend, and amazingly, that's exactly what Howard became. Some inexplicable spark was lit the day we met, and while it may not have been when Harry met Sally, it did sort of feel like when Batman met Robin, or when Tom met Huck, or when we let ourselves go when Ben met Jerry. Howard immediately became one of those once or twice in a lifetime people who shortly after meeting you couldn't ever remember or imagine not knowing. So we began to spend time together, presumably to work on All Conquers Love. The excitement of this great director making my movie soon became tempered by the stories I started to hear of Howard's reputation for working on scripts that somehow never became films. Howard and I would often be in a restaurant when any number of writers he worked with before came by, great writers like Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz, Chuck Shire, Dale Warner, Rick Richter, Robbie Fox, all of whom seemed to approach Howard with a mixture of affection and the bewilderment of a bride left at the altar. Howard, you don't call anymore. When Howard would introduce me as his new writer, I'd get a look, but what was it? Envy? Pity? I sometimes felt as if I was the newest member of a support group I didn't know I had signed up for. Well, Howard never did make my movie, but as usual, he had other plans for us that were even better. He had recently begun to make vague references to some mysterious big project he was considering, which turned out to be the Barbra Streisand Ryan O'Neal film, The Main Event. He was going to take the job contingent on being able to bring in his own writer, but being a huge studio movie, this was not his decision alone to make, and it was a hot gig. As fate would have it, at the exact same time, a new agent had just joined my agency. She was a beautiful, smart, funny, wise-ass Jewish chick with a duck fetish and a hyphenated Mexican name, Rhonda Gomez Quinones. And she became my new agent. She also happened to live with a director named Howard Zieff. So with Rhonda, I finally had what every writer dreams of, an agent willing to sleep my way to the top. So I was hired to rewrite the main event, and Rhonda, wherever you are, God bless you. I can only imagine the horrors Howard put you through to get me this job. With 4 months to go until the start date, Howard and I set about to do a page-one rewrite of what was to be one of Warner Brothers' biggest summer releases. It would turn out to be one of the greatest baptism by fire, Mr. Toad's Wild Rides a kid could ever be taken on, with Howard as my auntie and Uncle Mame rolled into one. The main event was a script that had gone through 18 rewrites. It was picked out of a pile because Streisand owed the studio one more film on an old contract. She was at the time considered the biggest female movie star in the world, and the idea was to recapture some of that Streisand-O'Neill What's Up Doc magic. A huge star vehicle, especially one guaranteed to have way too many cooks in the kitchen, was an unlikely choice for a master of whimsical nuance such as Howard, but the breakout commercial success of House Calls had proven intoxicating. Howard was very aware that he had started making films relatively late in his career, and it was obvious that he didn't want to spend a decade or two living in a loft surrounded by nothing but critical acclaim. So he took the gig and brought me along with him. Of course, Howard was supposed to be the grown-up in the room, but it didn't always work out that way. Our first meeting with Streisand was at one of her 3 LA homes, and as we waited in the living room for her arrival, Howard immediately focused on the baby grand piano in the corner. He nudged me in the side with a mad twinkle in his eye that could only have meant trouble. "You play the piano, right?" He asked me, suggesting I play a Streisand medley when she walked in. I didn't know a Streisand medley, besides which I wasn't sure this would make the greatest first impression on our superstar boss. But Howard super double dared me, so of course there was no choice. So as Barbra Streisand, the biggest movie star in the world, eventually entered the room for our meeting, it was to the accompaniment of me playing People, People Who Need People on her piano. Streisand tried her best to ignore the intro, which only seemed to stimulate Howard more. "Barbie, you hear what the kid's playing?" she asked, beaming like a parent at their kid's school recital. Barbara heard, but I don't think she knew if she was being honored or mocked. Frankly, neither did I. So she just sneered a bit and changed the subject. This became one of Howard's favorite movie star stories and one of his first dares I ever accepted. Many others would follow. In the course of getting the script in shape, Howard and I would often visit bookstores. Note to 20-somethings. Bookstores were buildings that used to exist where people could buy stacks of paper glued together with words on them called books. Would desperately haunt the film sections, casually looking for titles like How to Write a Big Studio Blockbuster in 30 Days or Less, standing next to film students with papers to write as we had sets being built in Burbank but no script to shoot. My favorite parts of the day were when Howard would quit the movie, usually before lunch. Or when we'd go to meetings with Barbara Ryan and John Peters, Barbara's producer, and as he often reminded us, the inspiration for Warren Beatty's character in Shampoo. This was before John was a billionaire, before the words goober or uber had been attached to his name, and he actually did pitch me once on a concept for trimming my hair. True story. The meetings were endlessly amusing to me, but often painful for Howard, as directing a film for a hairdresser turns out to be not really as much fun or creatively fulfilling as it sounds. When all kinds of machinations led to my leaving the film after 2 months, Howard was far more upset than I was, and would often call me late at night. "Barbara is now reading your pages to the new writers. I think she wants you back." I really didn't mind, as I was enormously grateful to have gotten the job, and had more than got my money's worth out of the gig, but Howard's loyalty was truly touching. During production, I'd get calls from Howard late at night, asking if I'd take a crack at a scene he had to shoot in 8 hours. Fortunately, my then recent college days had prepared me for all-nighters, so it wasn't difficult for me to meet Howard at Ben Frank's at 5:30 in the morning with a new scene for that day. Yes, they were free rewrites, but I loved every minute of it, and even my agent didn't seem to mind. It was an incredible experience to begin my so-called adult life in this business at Howard's side, and I learned a lot of essential moves from him. How to discreetly fold up and slip a tip into the palm of a major D and time it so that you're in your car by the time he sees what you've given him. How to warmly greet an actor you've worked with, but whose name you couldn't recall even if waterboarded, and introduce him to others without ever mentioning his name. How to have a meeting with a room full of executives and compliment all of their ideas without ever agreeing to a single one of them. Howard often called me his son, and although we both knew I had and have a great dad who didn't need any help with the job, it always made me proud when Howard said that, because in truth he was my professional father. Howard wasn't the first person to tell me I was a writer, but he was the first person who made me believe it. And at an age when I was wondering if I even had legs, Howard made me feel like I had wings. And in this business we have chosen, unlike commercial aviation, believing you can fly is as important as flight itself. I also loved Howard because of how much he loved Rhonda, by which I mean I was getting to know Howard just as I was getting to know myself and the world. And just as I was coming to see that we live in a town where faith is often honored more in the breach than in the observance, from 3-picture deals to marriages with prenups and mistresses included. To see a man so in love with and so devoted to such a wonderful woman was a whole other form of unspoken mentorship to me. I had many occasions to be with Howard on a set or in a studio commissary when women who graced magazines or billboards would stop by and make it clear that they were available for any assignment. I never saw Howard pick up on one cue or be the least bit interested. But when Rhonda came in the room, and every time Rhonda came in the room, Howard's eyes lit up, and everything she did and every cockamamie thing she wore made him so proud that she was his girl. The two of them were great to grow up around. People reveal themselves in adversity, and there's little that can be added to some of Howard's later years than what Richard Benjamin said at Howard's funeral, that during this time, Rhonda showed us the way two people in love take care of each other. Howard also showed us how someone in love with life embraces it, even when it seemed that life might not be in love with him. And every time I saw Howard in recent years, I was overwhelmed with the indomitable nature of his spirit. At the end, his expressiveness may have been reduced to the twinkle in his eyes, but what a twinkle it was. Howard's films, like his life, were full of whimsy and grace notes, populated with dreamers, innocents, and people who just made you feel good to be in their company, like Howard himself. His humor was sharp without ever being cruel. It often frustrated me in the days of my callow youth that Howard would not indulge in the darkly amusing sport of mocking other people's work, a practice so woven into the fabric of the film industry that it's almost tax deductible. I eventually realized that this wasn't because Howard didn't get the joke, but because Howard didn't make jokes at other people's expense. That's a pretty simple idea, but in this demented slaughterhouse we call the film business, such simple kindness is a form of passive resistance on an almost Gandhi-like scale. Howard was my mentor, my friend, my tour guide, and my partner in crime. He was a man whose praise, when I earned it, made me feel invincible, and whose disappointment, when I earned that, inspired me to be better. I love nothing more than to make Howard laugh, and I'm not going to stop trying now. Howard will always be on my shoulder, and he will always be in my heart.